If you watch the Winter Olympics, you've seen and heard about luge, a sport where athletes race down an icy track on a small sled, lying on their backs with their feet pointing forward, reaching speeds of over 90 miles an hour. At age 34, Ann Abernathy, today's guest, set the record as the oldest female to compete in luge at the Winter Olympic Games. But that wasn't the ending of her career. She made the U.S. Virgin Islands luge team 6 more times. And at age 63, Ann was the oldest woman to compete in the sport at the Olympics. And just for the heck of it, she sconed her skills as an archer. Now, as you may have guessed, Ann's journey was not trouble-free, far from it. She was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma just before her first Winter Olympic Games. She's had 20 knee operations, too many broken bones to count, and her home was demolished in a hurricane. And during a World Cup race, she suffered a very, very serious brain injury, and her doctors recommended that that should be the end of her participation, but not so. And after a long rehab period, she has regained total brain function. So the question remains, what drives a star athlete to continue competing against all odds? And what has Ann learned about herself and the process of aging? Ann, welcome to Older Women and Friends.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm delighted. Someone recommended that you were somebody I ought to get in touch with as a guest, and I'm delighted that I did. So I first want to ask you about your childhood and what it was like and what you were like.
Wow. Okay. We're going back decades here. Oh, a long time ago. What do you want to know?
Well, were you always athletic, for example? Did you always enjoy?
Well, I always wanted to be athletic, but, years ago, my mother was from the South, and women doing sports, it was not the ladylike thing to do. So even though I always wanted to compete, my mom was very much against it. So I ended up becoming a singer and working in high school. I was doing the theater productions, and I was the soloist in the choir and things like that. But I always enjoyed competing.
Well, and you mentioned being a singer and musician, and can you talk a little bit about that? I read that and I went, really? She was a musician before she was a star athlete? How did that happen?
Well, I've been singing ever since I can remember, probably before I even started talking. So music has always been a part of my life, and I've always enjoyed entertaining and being on stage. And I actually think that helped me in my sports career, because when you're a singer and you do musical theater and you're always up for going to audition, you're always on stage. Everybody's always looking at you. And as a result, when you're an athlete and it is the day of competition, all the cameras are on you, everybody's looking at you, and the pressure is there. But I was so used to it. And also being on stage, you learn how to ad lib. You learn, if you make a mistake, you just keep going. And in luge, particularly, if you make a mistake, you have no choice but to keep going, because you're not stopping. You're still moving.
You're in the middle of this icy track going around these curves. I mean, I've watched it multiple times and generally hold my breath during many of the runs. What kind of music did you sing or that you liked?
Well, I love musical theater. That was my passion. I studied classical. So every Christmas I was singing as the soloist for the Messiah. I was always doing weddings. Easter and Christmas were my busiest holidays. But I also wrote a lot of my own music and played the guitar. So I sang in lounges because it was just me and my guitar. So I did a lot of happy hours everywhere, helped pay my way through college and university. I went on a full music scholarship to university, but scholarships don't pay for you to necessarily eat. So that kept me going.
Needed to augment your financial situation. Just by the by, what did your mother think of you as a performer versus getting into athletics?
Oh, well, she loved that. She loved the fact that I was singing. I was a church soloist and doing classical music. I'm not sure she was really thrilled when I started singing at happy hours, but I enjoyed that because I could relate to the people. They're right in front of you and you can talk to them from the stage. The regulars that come in all the time. Every time a regular came in, I always knew their song and it got played in the next set. So I enjoyed that part of it.
And were you doing this in the States or were you in the Virgin Islands at this point?
I did it both in the Virgin Islands and in the States.
And then did you eventually settle in the Virgin Islands or did you kind of go back and forth, particularly as you were training?
Well, as I was training, just like anyone else in the luge or bobsled or most of the winter sports, you have to go to where the venues are. So my season from the 1st of October until the middle of March, I was on the road and in a different country every week. So that kept me extremely busy.
I was wondering how you got involved in a Winter Olympic in a country where there's no natural snow and ice. So how did you decide to pursue luge?
Well, that's a long story. I was in the Virgin Islands and my mom was living stateside and she said, you need to get in a bigger pool to meet somebody to start dating. So one Christmas, she gave me a membership to the Washington Ski Club in Washington, D.C., which was the largest ski club at the time, and included I think it was a winter carnival trip to Lake Placid, New York, which was great, except I lived in the Virgin Islands, so I had to fly from the Virgin Islands to Washington, D.C., for the privilege of riding a bus to Lake Placid, New York. And while we were in Lake Placid, we got there after an overnight trip. We went to the ski mountain, and it was total ice. Took one run down, and everybody that was on my particular bus were going, we don't want to go down that ice again. And someone said, well, this is Lake Placid. They just had the Winter Olympic Games, and there's a bobsled run here, and they're training today. It's the only bobsled track in the Western Hemisphere. So why don't we see if the bus driver will take us over there? So we went over, we got to the bobsled run, and because they just had the Olympics there in the 80s, there was a bobsled and a luge track. Now most of the tracks are combined. But we got out, and we were walking along the track, and we saw the bobs come down. And after watching the bobs, there was a sign up, and it said, this way to Luge. And I said, what's Luge? And we all walked over, and there were luge athletes coming down. And the bobsled sounded like dump trucks, but the luge, it was just like a fighter jet. It was like whoosh, going down. So we're sitting there, well, actually standing there watching them come by, talking about luge. And this guy walked up behind us, and he said, I believe it's pronounced luge. And the man standing next to me said, no, it's luge. And the guy who said it was luge he said, you must be right. And he walked past us, and on the back of his jacket, it said, U.S. luge coach.
Oh.
So we were all laughing, and he was talking to us, and he said, well, there are about 32 of us there. And he said, well, anybody that wants to try it, take a step forward. And immediately 30 people took a step back.
No. Oh, step back. Uh-oh.
Step back. And there I was with the guy next to me that swore that it was luge. And I thought, well, why not? And I looked at him, and he said, why not? Well, they didn't have a starter camp there at that point. But the guy next to me, who was a fireman from Maryland, well, I can go next year. And he went the next season. He called me after he went to the camp and he said, you can't go. I broke both my legs.
Oh, ouch.
And I said, well, that's never stopped me before. Don't tell me I can't. And I took time off and I went up and I tried it and absolutely loved it. And I was asked if I wanted to stay there for the rest of the winter and train with the U.S. team. And I did, and had no idea that it was going to be the start of something totally brand new in my life.
So you loved it from the start, but I'm just wondering about all the technique, and if you move your body one way and you're supposed to be going the other, you may crash into the side of do we call it a run or?
Yeah, it's a luge run or track. Yeah.
How long did you actually train before you entered the Winter Olympics?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years. Yeah. The Olympics are every 4 years. And so I started 3 years before the Calgary Games in 1988. The first year I trained primarily in Lake Placid, but then I started training internationally in Europe, and there was a group of athletes where there were only 1 or 2 athletes from smaller nations, developing nations, and the Virgin Islands was entering the Winter Games for the first time, and I wanted to represent my home. And so all of these athletes, there were about 13 or 14 of us, teamed together, and we got a grant from the International Olympic Committee, and we hired our own coach, who was an Olympic athlete and had won several world championships. And we shared a coach, and we shared a transportation, and we just became an international team of athletes.
So tell me just quickly about that first run in the Winter Olympics. First of all, you were the youngest person the oldest. What am I?
The oldest.
The oldest person. What was that like? Were you terrified? How did
No.
you? No.
Remember, I was an entertainer, so being on stage was not terrifying. You don't get to the Olympics by being afraid of whatever your sport is, and luge is just like that. I mean, everyone that makes it to the Olympics knows what the heck they're doing on the ice, or they wouldn't be there. But the interesting thing was not the day of competition, but the day before, when we were practicing, and I had taken a run down the track. We had 2 training runs. I'd taken my first run down, and I went back up to the start house. And as I walked in, my coach, Gunther Limmerer, and an athlete from the German team, George, were laughing. They looked at me and they started laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" And my coach looked at me and he said, "Well, they were talking about you when you went down the track, because not only are we practicing, but the commentators are practicing." And he said, "They said you were 34. And I said, "Yes." And he started laughing. He said, "No, you're 24." And
what does
which
that mean?
is 24 in German. And they had said that I was 34 years old. And I said, "No, Gunther, I'm 34. I'm 34." And he said, "No, you're 24, 24." And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, your German is not so good. You're 24. And I said, "No, your English is not so good. I'm 34. And George, meanwhile, he's standing up. He stood up and he put his hands on his hips and he said, "Anne, you're too old to luge." And I looked at George and I said, "I wasn't 5 minutes ago." So it was all the perception. They thought that I was 24 because they couldn't imagine that somebody by the age of 34 would be competing in the sport.
What a great story. So, you participated in, did you say 6 Winter
Olympic Games. I was the first woman ever to be in 6 Winter Olympics.
Unbelievable. And how did you do?
Well, just getting there, being from the Virgin Islands was huge because I don't have no financial support. I had to raise all my own money. And my first Olympics in 88, I finished 14th out of 35 women. So for my first Olympics, that's not too bad. And I was always the oldest one out there, and finished pretty much in the middle of the pack most of the time. Unfortunately, my last Olympics in Torino, the last day of training, I crashed and ended up breaking my wrist. And I also broke my scapula, but they didn't realize that it was broken until several weeks later. It turned out to be a nightmare because I still tried to compete. I had them put a half cast on so that I could take it off and compete, but things just worked out and I wasn't able to do my final runs. But just the fact that I was there was already a huge achievement.
So just by the way, were you married and or with kids at this point?
No. Just as a side note, just prior to my Olympics in Calgary, a doctor told me, you can't train for the Olympics. And I said, why can't I train? And he said, well, you're probably not going to live that long.
Oh.
You have cancer. And I said, so why can't I train? And he said, well, you have to focus on your cancer. And I said, no, your job is to focus on the cancer. My job is to get to the Olympics. And he frustrated me so much that I went on to 6 Olympics. So that's why they call doctors, they're in practice, because they don't always get it right. So I think just despite the doctor, I overcame the cancer.
And what kind of treatment did you have to?
I had lymphoma. So I went through a number of different treatments. This was in the 80s. So everything from chemotherapy to radiation. I did not have any surgery, fortunately, but
wow.
But no one knew.
No one knew.
You could not let anyone know. The 88 Olympics, I couldn't let my Olympic committee know because it was the first time the Virgin Islands were entering the Winter Olympic Games. And at that time, this is before the days of Lance Armstrong and Magic Johnson, where they had disease, AIDS and cancer, and it was okay for you to compete. In the 80s, you could not be sick and go to the Olympics. You were considered damaged goods. So I couldn't let anyone know that I had cancer. My parents didn't even know. It wasn't until I checked into the village and had the credentials around my neck that I told my parents first, because I didn't want them to hear by accident from somewhere. And then I met with our chef de mission from the Olympic Committee. And I said, you need to know that I have cancer in case it comes up, but I'm not telling anybody. And so it was 3 Olympics before it came out on the front page of the Washington Post.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it was in 2001, you had a very, very serious accident. I alluded to that in the introduction. What happened?
Well, I had a crash. And we always joked about it. If you're going to crash, you might as well crash while the cameras are running, because then you get footage and you can publicize it as much as possible, rather than crash and nobody know about it. So I did crash in a World Cup in Germany, and at that point it was former East Germany. Ooh. And I was knocked unconscious and had a traumatic brain injury, very similar to like a professional football player. You get hit on the head hard enough, you're gone. And so I did find specialists. I ended up in California training, and the first doctor I saw said, here, take these medications, because I was having some seizures. And I said, well, if I take this medication, will I be able to compete in the Olympics in less than a year? Because, the drug testing is a really big thing. There are certain drugs you can't take. And he said, you'll probably never be able to drive a car again, much less be in the Olympics. And of course, that put me in tears. But I ended up not taking the medication. I did special brain biofeedback therapy, which had never been done before, and came around in 3 months. My seizures were over. I talked to my coach. I had a doctor that was with me full time, 24/7. And she said, before you get on luge track, I want you to go down every water slide and roller coaster we can find, because she wanted to make sure that I was able to do it. And less than a year later, I qualified for the 2002 Salt Lake City Olympic Games, my 5th Olympics.
I'm just amazed. I mean, as someone who has had a couple of seizures, I know what that is like. I know what the medication generally is like. It's pretty heavy duty as you're adjusting. So I'm absolutely amazed that you recovered and that within 3 months you were back at it. It sounds like you're a very determined person. And if something happens or somebody says, I don't think so, or no, that's all you need.
It takes a team. Like I said, I had a doctor that was with me 24/7. I had specialists that I worked with. I was not about to go out there and do something that was going to harm me, because anything that hurt me, I knew all eyes were going to be on me. And I didn't want to do anything that was going to hurt the sport either, because the sport was something that I loved. So I didn't want to go out there and put my sport at risk or me at risk. So I had a team of experts, and we set goals, and there were tests and there were exams that I had. There were protocols that I had to pass, pretty much like a pro football player. When they have when they have a brain injury, they have to go through all these different protocols to show that they're okay and allowed to go out and participate again.
I generally think of football players having a concussion, but it sounds like what happened to you was more serious.
Well, it was a concussion, but I was unconscious.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a severe, traumatic brain injury. But, I'm back. I'm fine. Not only did I go to the next Olympics, but I went to the next 2 Olympics. The hardest thing about it was when I checked into the Olympic Village in Salt Lake City. Before I had crashed, I was ranked in the top 12 in the world in my sport.
Oh.
And when I qualified for the Olympics in Salt Lake City, I was last.
Oh.
I was one of the last to qualify. And I thought, I talked to my friend, who the doctor who had been with me, and I said, Melita, I may finish last. And she took me over to a computer kiosk that they had set up, and they had, bullet points going across the top. And she said, watch that. And then it came up and it said, Ann Abernathy makes history as the oldest woman to compete in the Winter Olympic Games, Grandma Luge. And that's when I became Grandma Luge. And that's when I realized that the Olympics are more than just winning the medals. Because when I finished my competition in luge, I was surrounded by people who I thought were looking for the medalist, but they were all yelling and they wanted Grandma Luge autograph. I wanted to take it and show it to my grandmama. I wanted to show it to my mom. And it made me being there realize that just being there, I was a winner.
Did you finish last, by the way?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
All right. You go, girl. So we're talking about age, and you are how old now?
I'm 72.
And when did you decide that you were going to train to become possibly an Olympic archer?
Well, after I had finished and retired as a luge athlete, unfortunately, my cancer came back again, and I had some more treatments, and I was feeling sorry for myself. And so I started writing a history of the Olympic sports. And as I was doing the research for it, I came across the sport of archery, which I had done when I went to university. You had to take a physical education course, and I took archery, and I was pretty good at it. And it turned out that the oldest woman to ever compete in the summer games did so in the sport of archery.
Oh.
And I thought, how old was she? And by how many months? And I thought, well, let's try it. And it got my butt out of bed. It got me up and moving. I started doing archery. It meant I had to start yet another sports federation in the Virgin Islands. Started the Archery Federation, and I just started training. And I know what it takes to get to the Olympics. I know how much work is involved, and I just put the time in, and I hired the right coaches, and started being ranked in the. Within 6 months, I was at my first World Cup, and then I just kept going, and I have ranked in the top 100 in the past couple of years.
So you're still out there with the bow and arrow?
Absolutely. I'm supposed to be in Abu Dhabi next month.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's exciting. Exciting. I read something or a quote from you because I wanted to ask you about aging as a woman, aging as a female athlete. And one of the things you wrote was, we should not be limited or defined by age. Do you remember writing that? Or even if you don't, what is the wisdom that's involved in being able to say that? What have you learned about yourself and the whole process of getting older?
Well, I think when you get older, you need to understand, your body and know the limitations of your body. I wouldn't go out on a luge track again because the reflexes that you need and the conditioning that you need are something that I could go down but not be on the Olympic level. However, archery is something that you can do at any age. As a matter of fact, I've been a world champion, and last year I was still ranked in the top 100.
Wow.
And for the Olympics in 2024, 64 women qualified, and I had the qualifications, but the last two spots are discretionary picks. And so I did not get one of the discretionary picks. But still, at the age of 70, I was at the same level as the Olympic athletes. So I know what it is to train. Being older as an athlete, I have a wealth of information to draw on. I also train differently because I am aware of my body, but I also have the skills and the techniques to be able to monitor my body and do what I need to do, not just for my body, but mentally I'm stronger. Not just being a performer, but I've been to 6 Olympics. There are not that many out there that I'm competing against that have been on the Olympic stage. And that's a whole mental thing that you have to be able to work with. The competition that I'm supposed to go to next month in Abu Dhabi is the Open Masters Games. Oh. And my photo is on the website. They're using me to promote archery at the age of 72. And I thought, wow, okay, they could have picked anybody in the world, but they picked me and picked my photo. So, wish I was getting paid for it. But
oh, wow.
Unlike the professional football players,
no,
I don't get paid. I have to pay to play, and I have to do all my own fundraising. So,
well, you also wrote, and maybe we'll stop here, but it was my favorite quote of yours: getting older is not limiting, but liberating.
Yeah, it is. Because when you look back at how much you've overcome to be where you are, I don't care who you are, when you get to be 60, 70, just making it to that, it's a huge accomplishment. And anybody that age, anybody my age, we've got a wealth of information to stand upon. And we are masters. There's a reason we shouldn't be called seniors. We should be called masters because we're masters at life.
Oh, I love that.
Because we've learned by experience.
Well, you are definitely a true master of life. I'm so impressed with what you've accomplished and the attitude that you have and making it through so many negative experiences and coming out on top once again. I want to thank you very much. I know you're busy and you're scooting off to foreign countries and exotic places. Do they have ice there?
No, but it is the opening ceremony in Abu Dhabi is the same night as the opening ceremony for the Winter Olympic Games in Milan. And it marks my 20th anniversary of retirement from the Winter Olympic Games. So it's huge. I mean, for me to have transitioned from a winter sport to a summer sport, and the opening ceremonies are the same night, it's just really, really remarkable. It's a night that was 40 years in the making.
And I will list Anne's information and her website and everything on the show notes so you'll be able to find her. Thank you again. This was really interesting, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.